What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the reveal of the number 18 team in my 2020 NFL Power Rankings with a deep dive into the Tennessee Titans. Before we hop in, I want to issue a quick reminder. Please do hit that like button down below. Really helps support my channel and help this video get more views, so I appreciate you in advance for taking a second to do that. So before I sat down for this deep dive, I knew I was going to come in lower on this Titans team, but I was really curious to see how much lower I was, and I was just floored to see NFL Network has them 5th and ESPN has them 8th, which is just insane. I guess it doesn't surprise me because they were in the AFC Championship last year. But look, without trashing the Titans or completely saying last year was a fluke, because I don't believe last year was a fluke, let's just say they were a Cinderella team. They overachieved. I don't think that's unfair to say. So without going too far into last year and discrediting what they did accomplish last year, I do think you've got questions as far as the quarterback and year-to-year continuity that they have in place here. But I will say that this team did accomplish something that I have been very critical of them for several years, and that is finding an identity on this team and knowing what they can really do well to maximize on a particular strength as far as running the ball and having a cohesive unit under a really good defensive head coach in Mike Vrabel. They have at least found a way that they are going to plan to win, which is much more than anything they could ever say with Marcus Mariota, where it felt like week to week, you just didn't know what kind of team you were going to be getting in Tennessee. So now they at least have an identity, but is that identity what wins consistently in the NFL as far as running the ball, relying on defense, and limiting what your quarterback has to do? No, it's simply not. That's been proved year after year after year. That's exactly why they're coming in 10 spots lower than NFL and ESPN. But there's still a lot of good things to say about this Titans team. I think they've come a long way in the last year. So it's going to be a fun roster to go through and talk about kind of how they can not just repeat the success that they had in the second half of last season, but how can they turn this into a more sustainable unit for years to come and try to replicate that here in 2020. So if you're new to the series, that's what we do. We go through the roster, we rank each position, how they stack up against the rest of the league. While we do that, we will be looking at my own custom Madden roster. So while it is a video game, they are my own ratings, and it's a nice copyright-free graphic that I get to use to show you how I perceive each player. After that, we'll take a look at this team's schedule and their Vegas over-under and talk about my win total expectations for this team. So we're going to start by talking about the offensive coach and culture, and that's going to feed into the quarterback ranking because Arthur Smith has totally come in and basically installed his own spin on the Matt LaFleur, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay scheme, which is outside zones, play action, vertical passing game that is a perfect fit with Ryan Tannehill's skill set that we'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. But between Henry and Tannehill and some of these younger receivers, I really like what Arthur Smith has done as far as establishing the identity of this offense that, as we said, was non-existent under Marcus Mariota, who you just didn't know what you're getting on a week-to-week basis. They at least have a plan of attack here, and I really like it. And it's a scheme that's really proved to work between teams like San Francisco, LA, Minnesota, Green Bay. These are all very good offenses. And they're trying to replicate that here in Tennessee under Arthur Smith. So I appreciate what they have going here. I don't know how innovative he is. You know, he's mostly just copying what other teams are doing, but he's executing it at a high level. Really used Ryan Tannehill well. I'm going to rank them 18th for offensive coach and culture. So I like what Arthur Smith is doing. He very well could be a guy whose name starts to climb up the future head coach ranks. And that's going to transition to Ryan Tannehill, where the quarterback position is going to rank 20th here, which, spoiler alert, is very similar to where Jared Goff is going to rank. And I see these guys very similar. I think Goff's arm's a little stronger. I trust his accuracy a little bit more downfield, but Tannehill does bring some added mobility. And when Ryan Tannehill was in Miami, the question was never really accuracy with him. It was almost always the pre and post snap processor, everything that happens between the ears. He just wasn't a very sharp quarterback. But he's come into this team with this scheme that we just described, and it has proved to be the perfect fit for him because I think it's a perfect storm of his skill set and the fact that he kind of just was handed this starting job because they were sick of Mariota. And Tannehill just came in like, screw it, man. I'm going to let this thing rip. I'm going to show off my arm strength and kind of go by trial and error here. And it totally clicked. It was almost this magical combination that led to the perfect storm that led to this team getting to the AFC Championship last year. So I do expect a lot of that to continue. He doesn't have a rocket arm, but it comes out with a lot of zip, and he really impressed with his accuracy last year. He was one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL downfield, if not the most. So I do anticipate that he'll still be particularly accurate, especially off of play action, throwing those crossers, those vertical shots. I'm also anticipating, though, a slight dip in the efficiency because it is Ryan Tannehill we're talking about here. It was a flash in the pan. It wasn't even a full season for a guy that's been underwhelming for the majority of his career. So I really like what I saw last year. I thought there was no world where I'd be sitting here heading into 2020 saying Ryan Tannehill's a top 20 quarterback in the NFL, so I'm very much acknowledging how well he played last year. Hell, he was PFF's top-rated quarterback last year because of how efficient he was. But am I expecting that to continue at that level? No, but I do like some of the skill sets we saw, and I do anticipate good quarterback play here in Tennessee. The backups here, you have Logan Woodside, who's an intriguing mobile threat with a pretty weak arm, and then Cole McDonald, a pretty good pick in the 7th round. I compared him to Nick Foles. He really has that confident processor that will play in this scheme. He doesn't have a cannon for an arm, but it's serviceable. You know, he, especially after he came out and ran, what was it, like a 4.6? Actually not that unlike Ryan Tannehill. So if you did have a rough, minor injury to Ryan Tannehill, I would see Cole McDonald probably winning the backup job, and he's an interesting rookie. I wouldn't be stunned if, he kind of surprised people in the light of guys like Gardner Minshew, Dak Prescott, if something serious happened to Ryan Tannehill. But it is Tannehill here, and again, they rank 20th for the quarterback. Now let's talk about the running back here, Derrick Henry, who was an absolute monster last year. Now, I don't want to keep discrediting what this team did last year, but Derrick Henry has a very specific skill set, and it's a skill set that is very dependent on the blocking in front of him, setting him up. His skill set is a lot of times very counterintuitive to what you would think about of a big bruising power back. He is a slow starter, which actually means straight up running between the tackles, he can be a little inconsistent. If the blocking isn't great, he's not hitting holes very hard. He doesn't accelerate into potentially plugged gaps very well, which makes it difficult for him to generate power. Now, where he's very special is when he has just a little bit of space to get started, let blocks set up, and accelerate through holes, getting a few steps to do so. Once he gets up to top speed, that's when he's special. And that's why you see this team running a ton of outside zone, and it's not a coincidence that Henry had his best season once they started running it all the time. So he's not Le'Veon Bell. He's not going to dance around behind poor blocking and turn poorly blocked runs into 4 or 5 yard gains. But what he is going to do is take a well-blocked play and turn it into 40 or 50 yards because he is just an absolute freight train when he gets going. The other criticism of Derrick Henry is that because of that lack of stop-start ability at his size, and frankly not having the best hands, he's just not a threat as a receiver, really at all. He doesn't make guys miss. That power doesn't translate in the screen game. He takes too long to get started. So he certainly is a bit of a one-trick pony, even if that one trick is a very unique asset to this team. So they rank 9th at the running back position. That's about where I would rank Derrick Henry, in the 7 to 10 range. My preference, I would rather have a guy like Josh Jacobs or a Joe Mixon, who might have 1 or 2 less 40, 50-yard touchdown runs on the season, but on a play-to-play basis, they're going to turn poorly blocked runs into better gains, and they're going to be a bigger factor in the receiving game. So that's why I'm a little bit lower on Derrick Henry. I still like him, and he's a perfect fit in this scheme. They're still going to get a top 10 ranking here. But there's a lot of great things about Derrick Henry being said. I think there's weaknesses to his game as well, and I think this team did a good job to just franchise tag him, because giving him that Ezekiel Elliott contract, I mean, it wasn't even worth it to give Zeke that contract. Giving Derrick Henry that contract, who to me is very dependent on everything else around him forming to his skill set, it's just not worth it. So behind him, you have Darrynton Evans, and this pick I loved. He is a guy that, if you just think about what Raheem Mostert did for the Niners last year in the playoffs, that is Darrynton Evans. Again, an outside zone runner, a guy with breakaway speed that has the patience to let a few blocks set up, find the cutback lane, or just kick it to the outside, and he is a true home run threat. In a way, he's very similar to Derrick Henry, despite being doing it in completely different ways. Evans is just going to run away from you, whereas Henry is more going to accelerate through you. But I honestly think the efficiency, if well blocked, is going to be about the same, a la Raheem Mostert or Matt Breida for the 49ers. And then Darrynton Evans actually will contribute as a receiver out of the backfield as well. So he's going to be a really nice complement to Derrick Henry, because Henry can be out there on first and second down. You're either going to run it with him or probably go play action or keep him into block. But on third down, when you might need a better receiving threat, but also maybe on a 3rd and 4, you want that outside zone threat, you still want that play action boot to be an issue, Darrynton Evans is really going to be the perfect complement to Derrick Henry and everything they got going on here. So I like that pick a lot. It's also going to give them a potential out if Derrick Henry isn't as efficient this year. Evans could be the long-term answer here. He's a guy that I've definitely targeted in my dynasty leagues, because I really think on this rookie contract, with Henry playing on the franchise tag, there's a chance that Darrynton Evans is viewed as a cheaper option to Derrick Henry that can give you almost everything that Henry gives you. So I hope I explained that well. I know it sounds weird to say that a 200-pound Darrynton Evans is going to be a similar player to a 245-pound Derrick Henry, but while the Derrick Henry stiff arms are fun and exciting, is it any different if Darren Evans just runs away from that guy and you get the same result as opposed to stiff arming him into the dirt in an exciting fashion? It's really not. As far as how these guys are best utilized, it's very similar. So anyway, there's a lot of time on the running back room, but this is a very run-heavy team, so I think it's more important to spend some more time on those running backs. The depth here is not great. You got Dalen Dawkins, Centerese Perry, Sean Wilson. They're going to battle it out. I don't have much to say about those guys, to be honest. It's all about Henry and Evans. So now we're going to talk about this receiving grade, which is 26, which actually came out a little bit lower than I would have expected, because these guys were really efficient last year. Guys like A.J. Brown, Jonnu Smith showed they were the perfect fit in this scheme. You look at a guy like A.J. Brown, his ability to block on the edge for Derrick Henry, and then these guys have the speed and run-after-catch ability to be the perfect fit in this play-action offense, almost used like the George Kittle and Deebo Samuel of this offense. In a vacuum, however, and given the sample size that we're talking about, it was a 8 to 10 game sample of these guys playing at a high level. As with everything in this series, we need a little bit of a larger sample size than that if I'm going to rank them amidst the top 20 receiving groups, as there's a lot of teams with good receivers out there. So notice how I mentioned A.J. Brown before Corey Davis. Corey Davis is a good number 2 receiver, and I loved Corey Davis coming out, but the man just has not been able to put it together on a consistent basis. He did not get his 5th-year option picked up. He's got the speed, he's got the size. He just doesn't consistently win, and I am not comfortable projecting that to change this season. I think he's a good number 2, but is a good number 2, a sophomore A.J. Brown and Jonnu Smith enough for me to stack up against some of these other receiving groups and make him even a top 20 unit? Not really, especially when you have a lack of depth behind those guys. So the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. But again, Arthur Smith does perfectly utilize these guys' skill sets, which does get reflected in the offensive coaching and culture ranking. But you have Adam Humphries behind Davis and Brown with the receiving group. He's just a starting caliber slot wide receiver. He is what he is, really. Then you have Khalif Raymond is kind of a gimmicky deep threat. You got basically nothing after him. You got Travion Thompson, Cody Hollister, Cameron Batson, Rashard Davis. Like I said, you don't have depth after Khalif Raymond. And then the tight end room, I'm a little surprised they haven't brought Delaney Walker back. And honestly, if they did, that might boost this up close to the 20 spot. Because I like Jonnu Smith, and I do believe in him. He hasn't been the most consistent player over the course of his career, but I do think he'll play well as this team's starting tight end, and he's definitely a player I like as far as fantasy is concerned. But you got Anthony Ferkser, Mike Pruitt, basically some converted receivers playing tight end here. I don't love what that brings from the blocking perspective, but there are some interesting mismatch problems. So it's a solid receiver group. A.J. Brown would really be the one guy I look to say, they stole him in the second round. He was the third guy in as many years that I said this team got a first-round player in the second round. It was Harold Landry the year before that. This year I said the same thing about Christian Fulton. So he definitely was underdrafted, and he is a guy that could be a potential star. But I'm not ready to say he's a top 20 wide receiver yet. And with the other names around him, none of them are crazy problems for defensive coordinators. So when you really think about it, the ranking makes more sense. But again, they do use A.J. Brown and Jonnu Smith very well inside this scheme. And that's all reflected from this play-action-heavy 18th offensive coach and culture ranking that Arthur Smith brings in here. Then the offensive line, it's a good offensive line. I ranked them 17th. Now you are losing your right tackle, Jack Conklin, to free agency. He's a very good right tackle. He's kind of a mauler in the run game, was a great asset for this team. I do think that loss is going to hurt this team's efficiency in the run game. As far as the pass protection, he was pretty overrated as a pass blocker. He was solid, good, starting caliber, above average even. I don't know how much they're really going to miss him, though. I think they're going to do a good job to supplement that loss with Dennis Kelly at right tackle, or Isaiah Wilson. We'll talk about kind of where he could come in here. I do think they'll get a drop-off in overall offensive line play in losing Jack Conklin, because that tackle position is very important, but they're prepared to kind of brace for that and neutralize how much they're going to lose there. So your offensive line as a whole, you got Taylor Lewan at left tackle, who's a total stud. Roger Saffold was a great signing. Ben Jones, low-key one of the best centers in the NFL. So center to left tackle, that left side of the line is his true strength. Now, right guard and right tackle are going to be question marks this year. So I think Nate Davis will get every opportunity to keep that starting job at right guard. He was a third-round pick last year, who certainly was a boomer bust guard. He was kind of those guys that contributed to a lot of those big runs. He's a guy that really gets out of his stance fast, can reach block well, and is a good run blocker. But when you want to talk about pass protection, being able to pick up stunts and kind of anchoring, that's an issue for him, and I expect that to continue. So I do think that Tannehill is going to see a lot of pressure from the right side of that line. And if the run game takes a dip because of Jack Conklin not being there, and they get into more third and longs, more traditional pass sets, that's when you could really see a noticeable difference in the offense next season. Now, we have not mentioned Isaiah Wilson yet, who was this team's first-round pick. An incredibly raw player coming out of Georgia. He's 20 years old, though, and the dude is just a freak. And the more I watched him, the more I had to just keep pushing him up my draft board. And ultimately, he became the number one guard on my draft board, which was an unpopular opinion. But when he played right tackle at Georgia, his pass sets were a disaster. Now, they ran a weird offense. They didn't ask for a lot of traditional dropbacks, and even a guy in Andrew Thomas didn't have the best kick slide technique. So I do blame a little bit of what was going on at Georgia as far as having an unconventional run-heavy offense there. But I don't expect him to come in at right tackle in the NFL and be a high-level pass protector right away as a first-round pick. So I moved him to guard on my draft board because this guy has rare get-off. He moves guys at a super high level. And at 6'6", 345 pounds, that guard position is still really important. It's a late first-round pick. I think he could be one of the best guards in the NFL in a few years. Now, this team has a long-term question mark at right tackle. I do think Dennis Kelly can step in and play at a low-level starting caliber level at right tackle. But Nate Davis, to me, is the biggest question on this offensive line because of the inconsistency. Now, you're going to get some of that inconsistency with Isaiah Wilson as well, but Wilson's just such a freak, and I think because his anchor is so much better than Nate Davis, he could actually kick from college tackle to NFL guard and just be a stud on day one. So I'm very interested to see how Isaiah Wilson's going to come in here. Does he even start this year? Does he start at right guard? Is he just going to sit and develop for a year at tackle? He is a wild card, but he's a very intriguing player with a very high level, high upside skill set that if he could be an impact in year one, that could be a big boost for this offensive line. Now, the depth behind Isaiah Wilson is a problem. If this team has any injuries, they will have Wilson to step in, but other than that, they're in trouble. You've got David Kessenberry, Daniel Munyer, Jamil Douglas, Avery Genesee. You do have Ty Simbrello, who can play a little tackle, but these guys do definitely have to stay healthy up front. So a good, not great offensive line following the loss of Jack Conklin. So your offense as a whole is going to come in 21st. Now, you can't go a TFG deep dive without me talking about the importance of that quarterback position. It's still Ryan Tannehill we're talking about. I won't go over it again, but they come in 20th at quarterback. So that is going to hurt the projections on offense a little bit. And I think just in general, you're hoping for a lot of that high-level efficiency, both in the run game and in those big chunk plays in the passing game, to continue. Now, that is sort of the design of this offense, so it's no coincidence. But it is going to take a team that's been traditionally stale to replicate that excitement. So I do have my questions about this offense, but I really like how they've identified their players' skill sets and really maximized what they do well. Mike Vrabel is a Patriots disciple, and that's, Belichick football 101. So I do need to applaud them for that. And that's a big reason why this team's success could very well carry in to 2020. Now let's talk about this defense. Mike Vrabel has done an excellent job with this defense, and I expect them to be very good. Again, they have some warts, but they're going to come in 11th. And a big part of that is how impressed I was with how hands-on and schematically impressive Mike Vrabel was last year, kind of creating his own version of the hybrid Belichick 3-4 defense here. Now, we're going to see a lot of the same staples, especially when we get to the secondary, but the front seven is a little bit different. It's more of a traditional 3-4. So let's start with the run defense, where they are going to rank 18th. So you're actually going to have a lot of moving pieces on this interior defensive line. You're losing two of your best players from last year. Obviously, Jarrell Casey, but also Austin Johnson, who's proved to be a very good run-defending nose tackle. And I'm not overly confident in the pieces that they brought in to be great in run defense. You are looking at some of these more traditional hybrid 3-4 defensive ends, guys like a Jack Crawford, Laryl Murchison. Crawford, the veteran, Murchison, a 5th-round pick. Both lighter guys, going to play some 3-tech, some 4-tech here. Maybe hinting that Vrabel wants to be more of that moving front that we talk about with those Belichickian defenses. But you do have your nose tackle in Daquan Jones, who is a stud. They get him back on the last year of his contract. And then you're really looking at Jeffrey Simmons, first-round pick from last year. He was a top 10 player in that class that fell because of an ACL injury. But my God, I thought he would have to take a full redshirt year. He actually came in and played at a high level as a rookie. I have super high expectations for Jeffrey Simmons. Now, he needs to come out and show it before you get that confidence. He's going to bring both run defense and high-level pass rushing on a week-to-week basis. But he's definitely a player that I look at that is an answer to something I really questioned about this defense for years, and that was, who are the superstars on this defense? Now, you are replacing Jarrell Casey with him, who at the time was their superstar, so a little hand-in-hand there. But Jeffrey Simmons is a guy that can emerge as a Chris Jones type of impact, a Fletcher Cox type of impact. This guy in college was special and unblockable. And if he can reach his upside, which to me is that of one of the 5 best interior rushers in the NFL, that is going to be more than Jurrell Casey gave you back in the day. So he hasn't shown it yet, but I do think very highly of Jeffrey Simmons, who we'll have to mention again when we get to the pass rush. But you just in general have a bigger lack of depth on the interior. You got Matt Dickerson, Jordan Williams, Isaiah Mack, Amari Bledsoe, Joey Ivey. I don't feel very great about this defensive line on the interior this year, or so much on the edge. I mean, Harold Landry and Vic Beasley, they bring some interesting things as pass rushers, but when you talk about run defense, those aren't ideal for early down run defense. That's why you do have a DeAndre Walker coming in here, a 5th-round pick last year. And then I do like what Kameli Correa did, especially down the stretch last year. So I do think we'll see some more Walker and Correa on earlier downs. They'll rotate Vic Beasley in. But the linebackers do help here. You got Rashaan Evans, who is really a good thumping middle linebacker. Jayon Brown has come along in that department as well as a guy that's been more of a coverage player throughout his career. So it's certainly a capable run defense, and Vrabel's going to coach that discipline up. It's not all about the bodies. That's why they rank right around the middle here. Even though I don't love the interior defensive line here, I do have a lot of confidence in Vrabel to get these guys to play tough and cohesive and do their job within this scheme. That's a big part of run defense. So they're getting a little bit of the benefit of the doubt there. Then the pass rush here is a concern for me. You have Harold Landry, who I loved as a top 15 player in that class. He has come along on a year-to-year basis, and I expect him to continue to develop here in year 3 as that speed rusher around the edge, kind of being that baby Von Miller that I projected him to be coming out of the draft. So I do like Harold Landry, but where else are you getting a pass rush here? It's somewhat similar to what we just talked about with the Cardinals. Now, Landry is not Chandler Jones, but Jeffrey Simmons is a lot better, at least I project him to be, than Jordan Phillips. But, you have Jeffrey Simmons, who could be that X factor here. If he can prove to be a 60, 70 pressure interior defensive lineman in his first season being healthy here, I mean, that is an extremely optimistic prediction. But it could happen. But after Landry and Simmons, I'm pretty worried. I mean, the Vic Beasley signing to me, whatever. I mean, the guy is not a good football player. You want to stun him up and utilize his scheme and have him clean up sacks. I still don't know how the hell he lucked into 15 sacks that one year, but I mean, he has no element of power. He doesn't have counter moves. He just has a good get off and can run around the edge. So if you use him correctly, he can be a piece. But as a starting edge, I am not excited about that. We talked about Correa and Walker. Those guys aren't much of pass rushers. They are good, versatile, discipline players. You have Reggie Gilbert, who's kind of a career rotational rusher. The edge group behind Harold Landry is, simply put, poor. This team did contemplate Jadeveon Clowney. It's kind of weird that this is back-to-back deep dives. We're talking about a team that could sign Jadeveon Clowney. I don't know if they had the cap space to make that happen. They did also bring in Vic Beasley on like $11 million this year, so I don't know if they can afford it. But that would make a ton of sense to be that bigger-bodied guy opposite of Landry. So just an idea. It probably will not happen, but that would be huge for this defense and a logical landing spot. We'll see if that ends up happening or not. Probably not. But as far as the interior rush after Jeffrey Simmons, I do like Jack Crawford's athleticism, but you're probably not getting much from him. Daquan Jones is just a nose tackle. Just a bunch of kind of low-level talent after that. Laurel Murchison could get into the mix as a rotational guy, probably behind Jack Crawford. But as a 5th-round rookie, probably not expecting a whole lot there. So the pass rush to me ranks 25th. This team's very clearly modeling their team building philosophy after the Patriots, where they're like, you know what, we don't need great pass rushers here. We just need specific skill sets, guys like a Vic Beasley, Harold Landry, Kameli Correa. And they're going to put more emphasis on that secondary that we're working our way up to. I do want to talk about the linebacker room here. It's a good linebacker room. So you got Rashaan Evans, who's more of that traditional middle linebacker type, and then Jayon Brown, who's more of the cover guy. Now, both guys have evolved in their counterparts. Evans has come along in coverage, and Jayon Brown has come along as far as his discipline and run defense. But I really like this duo. They've developed nicely together. They really play nicely off each other, and Mike Vrabel deploys these guys very well. So I don't really have anything bad to say about them. It's an excellent linebacking group. I think they're going to continue to grow together for years to come. It's why they rank in the top 8. And then you have David Long, a 6th-round pick last year, Nick Duzenbar, Nigel Harris. Not a lot of depth behind those two. Depth in general is falling out here. This team is becoming more top-heavy as they spend more and more money in free agency and have more players to pay here, like Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry. But that is going to lead us to the secondary here, which is a very positive position group to end on. It's going to be the highest ranking group on the team, ranking 5th. This is the spot that has a ton of depth on this defense. So really following that model of coverage before front 7, sort of building from out, up, and down as teams like Miami and Detroit, the New York Giants, all these teams following the Belichickian model are going after. And it's no different here in Tennessee. But this is all going to start with Adoree Jackson, who was a first-round pick in 2017, a guy that did a little bit of everything at USC, not just on defense, but kick returning. I think they even used him at receiver. But he's one of the best athletes in the entire NFL. And you knew when he came into the league it was going to be a learning curve, but he's been on that curve, and it's been trending up and up and up. And I think this could be a big year for Adoree. To really emerge as a top 10 corner in this league, especially as far as man coverage is concerned. The guy that he'll stick to anyone. So I love leading the charge with Adoree Jackson. I think you have a true number 1 that's only getting better in him. And then you have some veterans. You have Malcolm Butler and Jonathan Joseph. Frankly, these two players are very similar, and I wouldn't be surprised if both of them still start here, with Butler on the outside, with maybe Joseph making a late career transition to slot corner. Both these guys are really heady players that are going to do exactly what Mike Vrabel asks them to do. But you do have a much better athlete and a younger character in Christian Fulton behind him. I mentioned this earlier. This is the 3rd straight year I've thought that this team got a first-round prospect in the 2nd round. It was Harold Landry, then it was A.J. Brown, and now Christian Fulton. So while you have some good veterans ahead of Fulton, I think ideally from a neutralizing mismatch problems and neutralizing speed point of view and running a lot of man coverage here that these Belichickian defenses, or at least the Belichickian philosophy, goes for in 2020, you're going to look at Fulton and Adoree Jackson that can really become one of the better corner duos in the league, potentially. So I like what they have in Christian Fulton, who looks really good as far as his man technique. He's got the athleticism. I think if he does have a question, it's sort of that zone route recognition when he has his head to the quarterback. So I don't know if he's quite ready to come in and be a starter, because even in a man-heavy scheme, you're going to be running a lot of zone coverage. And that's why I think Butler and Jonathan Joseph just might be the starters here. But then you have Ty Smith, who came in out of necessity last year as a much thinner secondary, and he proved to be very capable depth. He made some big plays for this team down the stretch. So I like what you have in Ty Smith as a 5th corner in this very deep group. And then they draft Chris Jackson, a 7th-round pick out of, Marshall this year. So he'll probably be your 6th corner. And then you have a deep safety room as well. Now, Kevin Byard, I don't think he gets discussed enough as the best free safety in the NFL right now. Earl Thomas getting up there in age. He's not the best safety. I still would give that to either Jamal Adams or Derwin James. Pick your poison. But Kevin Byard, to me, if I need a center fielding, rangy, playmaking ball hawk, he's going to be my drink of choice at the free safety position. And he's obviously going to boost this thing up. He's going to be the Devin McCourty for this defense. He will do a little bit of everything. But what he brings to the table in the middle of the field from a coverage perspective, it's special. And I don't think you can understate it. I think it's reflected in this top 5 DB ranking. And then you have depth to compete at the strong safety position. You do have Kenny Vaccaro, really good run defender. I still don't love him in coverage. He is aggressive and he'll make some plays, but he's just not that good of an athlete. They'll use him as that true box safety, however, and limit his weaknesses as far as range is concerned. But I think the depth you have here is really special too. You have Amani Hooker, who's a 4th-round pick last year. Really heady, smart player. A good physical tackler, a guy that can play free or strong safety. And then you have Dane Cruikshank, who's a really special athlete who's shown some nice flashes at safety, who I think is just going to have to get into the mix. I think he'll get used as that 3rd safety off the bench to be more of a, 2-high, 3rd and long, 2-shell high safety. And then you even have a veteran in Ibrahim Campbell, who's been kind of a versatile veteran D-back in this league, will probably make the team as a special teamer. So I like that we get to wrap up with a really important position in the secondary and rank this team very high. And I'm glad I get to kind of wrap up with that optimism, because I know this wasn't the most enthusiastic deep dive, but I think it's important, right? Like, this team is going from a Cinderella 9-win team that beat a fraudulent Patriots team and then knocked off the powerhouse Ravens team last year that was kind of sleeping on them. And then it all kind of died when they met the Super Bowl champions in the AFC Championship. But ESPN ranks them 8th. NFL is them 5th. Like, this is not a perfect football team. I think you're crazy to rank them in the top 10. There's reasons to be a little hesitant here. But that said, if everything clicks, which is kind of the story with these teams in the 16 to 25 range, this is a playoff team. They really are. I mean, this offense knows what they want to do. They have the right skill sets to be an effective offense. I don't think it's ever going to be a top 12 week-to-week explosive offense, but they got guys that make plays. They got a scheme that works. And then defensively, I mean, the importance of secondary can't be understated, and this could be one of the best in the league this year. They could really replicate what the Patriots defense did last year. And if you get a guy like Jeffrey Simmons to reach his potential, and then maybe you do get an explosive edge duo out of Harold Landry and Vic Beasley, like, I rank this defense 11th, but there's definitely a path for this team, especially with a good coach, who I think his trajectory is only going up in Mike Vrabel, for this to be a top 5 defense. So top 20 offense, a top 5 defense, that's a really good football team. Let's look at this team's schedule and what I'm expecting for this team. They do open at Denver. Denver's strangely good in the opening month of the season. This team does not have a particularly difficult schedule, and while I'm lower on this team, I do actually have them winning 9 games here, starting 6-2, and then basically trading wins and losses for the second half of the season. Again, if you're listening to this on the podcast version, I encourage you to head over to YouTube at some point so you can see exactly which games I'm picking here. I'm going to kind of gloss over that. But I have them going 9-7, a win range of 7-10. But their over-under is 9 wins. They're kind of reflecting the hype on this team that I'm not necessarily going to match all the way. But in a league where 14 teams are going to make it, 9 wins here, that very well could make them a playoff team. I would wager that that's about as far as I will go with this team, is kind of a 6 or a 7 seed that is more likely than not going to get bounced early, just because I don't think focusing on the run and having Ryan Tannehill as your quarterback with a defense that doesn't have that much of a pass rush is a Super Bowl caliber team. But they've come a decently long way from that middling, average, meh team that I felt so dreary talking about for 2 or 3 years in a row. This team has an identity. They got some character, some flavor, some coach and culture going on. And I think Titans fans are gearing up for a pretty fun season here. So that's going to be the deep dive. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please do hit that like button if you like this video, like the series. Who do you think is coming next? Cheers as always. We'll see you for the next one. Peace out.